This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Adam Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic preamp into the Empirical Labs EL8X distressor mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Adam Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show, and we really appreciate it. Now, get ready to rock.
It all comes down to emotion, and I'm trying to just hammer this into my own head. But at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do is play somebody a song and have them feel happy or sad or want to dance or whatever. Everything we should do should be in service of that. And it's easy to go down these rabbit holes of chasing snare sounds and things like that that just don't matter at the end of the day,
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Adam Audio celebrates 25 years of designing industry-leading monitors in Berlin by unveiling the Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a limited time. With the XART ribbon tweeter design, customizable speaker voicings, and SonarWorks integration for room correction, these monitors deliver professional-grade sound perfect for Grammy-winning producers and home studios. Make your studio cooler than cool with the Arctic White A4V and A7V, available for a limited time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Are you struggling to make your mixes sound professional? If your tracks feel weak, distant, or lack punch and clarity, I've got the perfect solution. My free course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will teach you how to achieve pro-level mixes from your home studio using free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. But these techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you use Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or another. If you're ready to make your best record ever, go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now for free. Find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Jimmy Nutt, a Grammy Award-winning engineer. Jimmy grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, surrounded by musicians steeped in blues and rock. He joined his first band at age 13. Early on, Jimmy was interested in recording and sound. He acquired a Tascam 4-track cassette recorder, that sounds familiar, while still in his teens and started learning how to record a band. In 2000, Jimmy moved his family to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, to work as a staff recording engineer at Fame Recording Studios. That's a nice place to get started, right? During his time at Fame, he recorded sessions for Jason Isbell and the 400 unit, Clarence Carter, Heartland, Russell Smith, the Drive-By Truckers, and many more. He worked at Fame for almost 3 years before becoming an independent recording engineer and producer. He's also a staff writer for Fame's publishing company during this time. So you're a songwriter as well.
I am.
We'll ask about that.
Yeah.
So Jimmy is now the owner of the NuttHouse recording studio located in downtown Sheffield, Alabama. Very cool place that I've gotten to visit and look forward to visiting again. That's also where Craig Alvin has his studio.
Mm-hmm.
He transformed a bank built in 1955 into a recording studio and has hosted numerous recording sessions in the last 14 years, including well-known artists Percy Sledge, The Dead South, Blind Boys of Alabama, Dylan LeBlanc, Billy Ray Cyrus, Jason Isbell again, John Paul White, Donna Jean Godshaw, and the Steel Drivers. And in 2016, Jimmy won a Grammy Award for engineering and mixing the Bluegrass Album of the Year, the Steel Drivers, the Muscle Shoals recordings. Congrats on that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
In 2020, Jimmy won the Canadian Juno Award for producing and mixing the Traditional Roots Album of the Year, the Dead South album Sugar and Joy. Thanks so much to Jake Kaiser, Mark Rubel, Craig Alvin, all for suggesting Jimmy come on the show, and finally Kyle Lenning for making our introduction, helping to make it happen.
Nice.
Really appreciate it, and it's great to finally get to meet you, Jimmy, and have you here.
Nice to meet you, Liz. I'm happy to be here. I'm a fan of your Recording Studio Rockstars podcast.
Please welcome Jimmy Nutt to Recording Studio Rockstars. Jimmy, are you ready to rock, dude?
Absolutely.
All right, cool, man. Glad to have you here. Glad to have you here at the Ready to Rock Studios, my podcasting studio. I've given a bit of brief introduction, but if you want to give a little more of your background story, you can give us a short version if you want.
Absolutely.
So like, I love hearing the 4-track thing, because of course that was my first thing too. And
absolutely,
what a treat it was to be able to get something like that.
Yeah, I've still got it actually. I don't think it works anymore, but it was the Portal One. It's funny because leading up to this podcast, I'd been reminiscing a little bit and actually found some old recordings that I did on that 4-track. I was in a band called The Underground with my buddy James LeBlanc, who we kind of came up together and still work together. I actually kind of followed him to Muscle Shoals. But yeah, I mean...
And where were you doing the band thing? That was
in Shreveport. That was in Shreveport, Louisiana. Yeah, I pretty much immediately got into a band once I started playing. I still can't figure out what I want to be as far as a musician. I would take drum lessons and walk across the hall and take guitar lessons. And, I played my first band, I was a drummer, and then I was a guitar player, and then I sang and wrote, and then I played bass. I've just kind of done it all. But
what's Shreveport like? Is that a coastal, or is that inland?
No, it's Shreveport is in the very north.
Very north.
Yeah, north part. It's almost like East Texas.
Okay.
So, we had some of the, Cajun influences, but not much. Actually, my buddy James, his family was from South Louisiana, so I got to experience some of that from him. But Shreveport was it was a really cool music town. I mean, there were James Burton is from Shreveport, who went on to play with Elvis, and there's several actually Keith Stegall's from Shreveport, Louisiana, who's a famous Nashville producer, so it was a great place to grow up. It really was. They after I left in like 89 or 90, they legalized gambling. And so it's like the landscape has changed in Shreveport. It's a totally different place from where I grew up. But
is that sort of like in the vicinity of the Ozarks or no?
No.
Okay.
No.
I'm gonna stop asking dumb geographical questions.
No, but it was a great place to grow up. But yeah, and like I said, I just started playing in bands at like 13 years old, and I was the guy in the band that knew how to hook up a PA, and and so like I said, got the 4-track and started writing songs and learning how to record, and it just kind of grew from there,
That's what I always said about qualifying as the engineer at that stage in life was like, well, A, I had the 4-track, so you're automatically the engineer, but B, I was the guy who could figure out how to go to Radio Shack and connect this adapter to that adapter to that cable to get this instrument into that
Absolutely.
input.
I miss Radio Shack.
I mean, it didn't sound very good. Yeah. Those adapters probably weren't the greatest solution.
No.
It was like a mad puzzle. It's like, how can you connect these things?
Absolutely.
It still is.
Yeah, it's and we got into high school, and there was a talent show every year that we that was our whole goal in life, was to win the talent show, which we never did, but we did win a battle of the bands at one point, and the prize was 3 hours of studio time, and at that point, Shreveport had a really great studio called Nightwing. And so we won 3 hours of studio time at Nightwing. First time I'd ever stepped into a professional studio. And man, it hit me.
How old were you?
Man, I'm not 100% sure. I want to say like 17, 16, 17, somewhere right around in there.
That'd make an impression on you.
Somewhere right around in there. And so here we are in the studio. We've won 3 hours of studio time. I was kind of the primary songwriter in the band and singer, if you can believe that, because I'm a terrible singer. But anyway, and so we go in, we basically play live, and the engineer was a guy named Ron Capone. And at the time, didn't mean anything to me. But Ron Capone worked for Stax and in Memphis.
Any relation to Al?
And it's not that I know of. You got to wonder. But yeah, I mean, he, recorded Elvis and all kinds of, I mean, Rod is, he's got a great resume. But he recorded us, and actually, it still sounds really good to this day. I think we just did like live the 2-track or something.
Yeah, I bet he knew how to get a band to sound right.
Yeah.
Probably the simple version.
Yeah, the simple version. And like I said, it was mainly live. We had 3 hours just to kind of get a finished product. So, but yeah, that was my first experience in a real studio. And I remember it making a huge impression on me. Yeah. Just, all the knobs and buttons.
It's interesting, yeah, because this is a time where you have access to a 4-track. But the difference between 4-track and studio was still a little bit like studio's kind of still a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And it still can be. But,
sure.
It's the world of just being able to sort of like fabricate a studio out of what's coming out of your laptop computer didn't exist yet.
Oh, no, we were a long way from that. So, yeah. And it kind of got me interested in it. But still at that point, I wanted to be a rock star. I mean,
Yeah.
That was the
goal.
Now
here you are, man.
And here I am. So, but yeah, so, get out of high school. Basically, every move I've made in my life, I've made to kind of further myself in music. And out of high school, I moved to Dallas, Texas. Got in a band there, played around a little bit. Couldn't really make anything go too much there. And again, my buddy James LeBlanc, you'll hear his name a lot through this, but he hit me up and said, "Hey, let's move to Austin." So we all moved to Austin, Texas, got a band house, rented a house together. We all lived together and played together, and immediately got a weekly gig at the Black Cat Lounge on 6th Street in Austin.
Good name.
Yeah, it was a very cool club, and we tried to make a go of it, but again, it just didn't stick. And James moved back to Shreveport. I got married and had a kid. Started working a day job, and had kind of given up on making a living in the music business. And I guess in about...
And what age at this point?
Well, I would have been, let's see here.
Was this 20s?
Yeah, I was
late 20s?
95. I was 25 when I had my son, Jordan, and my wife, Angie. We just kind of, I just kind of got a day job and just kind of, put my head down and went to work,
Yeah.
But 4 or 5 years later, James, through a mutual friend, gets told about Fame Recording Studios in Muscle Shoals, and so he starts going. He gets a meeting with Fame, and they end up signing him to a production and publishing deal. So I'm still in Austin. And he's calling me saying, "Hey man, you got to come see this place called Muscle Shoals, Alabama, Fame Studios." I had no idea, never even heard of it. I grew up in the 80s. It just wasn't something I was aware of,
Yeah.
So, yeah, we ended up moving to Muscle Shoals, and anyway, one thing led to another, and I ended up getting a job at Fame.
That's amazing. Yeah. So what was that like to walk into Fame for the first time? Do you remember the...
Oh God, it was incredible.
First walk in?
Yeah, it was incredible. Yeah, we went to visit a couple of times and met Rodney Hall, who's Rick Hall's son.
Yeah.
Rick started Fame, and Rodney and his brother Mark Hall had started a publishing company. And so James was basically working for them, writing songs as a songwriter for them. And yeah, we came over to visit, and you walk into this studio in the middle of this town, this nondescript building, and this, you're in Fame, and you see all the history on the walls.
Yeah.
And it was incredible.
It's a time capsule too.
It's a time capsule.
Way.
Yeah, it is. But I was just overwhelmed, and we had a good time, and stayed at Rodney's house, and just hung out. And basically I said, "Man, if I moved here, could I intern at the studio?" And he said, "Sure," and but no guarantees of anything. So anyway, my wife, who's always been so supportive of me, we said, let's move to Muscle Shoals.
That's great.
So we did. I quit my job. I got a job in Decatur, Alabama, as a kind of a fallback, and we moved to Muscle Shoals. I was working in Decatur as an outside salesman. It's kind of the only job I ever really did wrong. I was my head was not in. I was there for fame. I was there to work at Fame and be in the studio, and so. But
and I bet that area, Muscle Shoals. So let's paint a quick picture for the rockstars. So Muscle Shoals is really kind of like 4 little town centers.
Yeah. They we're kind of calling it the Shoals at this point, which are the Quad Cities, which is Florence, Alabama, which is kind of the biggest city.
Yeah, the university's there.
University of Alabama, University of North Alabama.
I was luckily I was able to charge. Drove my electric car down there. I was luckily able to charge because the university had a charger. Otherwise, I was in an electric car desert.
Well, actually, I was in Tascam just the other night, which is another one of our little cities.
Yeah.
And they had 2 charging stations right downtown.
Right on.
I was shocked. And so I think that's fairly new development. But yeah, you got Florence, Muscle Shoals, Tascam, and Sheffield. And Muscle Shoals is the most, well-known city. But there's not a whole lot. I mean, there's not a whole lot there,
Right.
I mean, Fame's there. There's a few good restaurants, but
I agree. When I was driving around looking for Fame and everything, I wasn't entirely sure which part is actually Muscle Shoals. It's just these interesting intersections and cool old buildings, and you see you're like, oh, this would be so cool with This whole corner could be great. Sheffield, particularly, I'm like, I look at that downtown area. I'm like, this is going to be really cool.
Yes, Sheffield is a great place. That's where I live, and that's where my studio is, and right in downtown Sheffield, and that's where Muscle Shoals Sound was at. It was in Sheffield on Jackson Highway, still is, and so that's confusing to people, and most people when they talk about coming to my studio to record, they say, oh, we're going to Muscle Shoals. Well, you're actually going to Sheffield, but it doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. Muscle Shoals is the name that everybody knows.
Yeah. So it's like the area.
Yeah, the area.
These little town centers, which are cool because it means you've got all these different little hubs you can go to. And Florence is struck me as the one that has sort of been modernized and fixed up because it's next to the college.
Totally.
But great. And there's an old theater there, old movie theater that shows movies and has shows.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. Yeah,
you got your coffee shops there, rock stars. Got to have a good coffee shop.
Got some great coffee shops, and actually, we have some great restaurants.
Yeah,
we have several really good restaurants. Yeah.
And then even cool record stores. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like that gas station that's converted.
Yeah.
And then we'll give a shout out to just a couple of people. So Craig Alvin in his studio is right
across the street.
Steed is right across the street from you. Mm-hmm. Somebody's got a history of music museum there as well. I think.
Peanut Montgomery.
Peanut Montgomery. Yeah, that looked really interesting.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna give a shout out to my buddy Dave Gerke, who's building a ballroom there.
He bought the old VFW.
What's the title of that going to be? Yeah, the old VFW hall that's going to go in as a ballroom.
I haven't heard what he's going to call it. To be honest with you.
I knew it. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah,
I knew it. But then he's also there's a pub, the Sheffield Pub or Public House.
Okay.
I'm going to call it the pub.
Yeah, I heard that he was trying to make the decision on the name. Yeah, I like the Public House.
But there's so much cool stuff down there. And then I did an interview with Glenn Rosenstein over at Studio B. at Fame too, which was great. So
yeah, I love Glenn.
I highly encourage you to go down and visit Rockstars. Really fun trip.
It's amazing. As far as setting the scene, in 2000, this was pre the movie Muscle Shoals. The movie Muscle Shoals, I think, came out in 2012. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a real dividing line, in the history there from my perspective. Because, there was nobody giving tours. There was no tourism at all as far as music tourism. And, we would, when I started working at Fame, we would have once a month, someone from England would come walking in the front door. Hey, can we see the studio? Sure, come on back. We'll show you around, that kind of thing. But now, I mean, there's a real vibrant tourism. I mean, Fame gives tours several times a week. Muscle Shoals Sound does tours on a regular basis. I have people stopping by my studio all the time. I mean, it's really changed.
Yeah.
That movie and a lot of other things really put the spotlight on our town, and more people are showing up.
You guys have created a music foundation as well, or something. It's the Muscle Shoals. I'll need your help with the names of some things.
Yeah.
But I know, and I'll just ask you this now. There are like real incentives for artists and musicians and bands to come on down and make a record there.
Absolutely.
As well, right?
Yeah, the Shoals Economic Development Authority got a grant for that single purpose to allow people to get rebates for recording in the Shoals. So we created an organization called Muscle Shoals Music Makers, and they kind of handle that. And basically, if you are from out of town and come into our community to make a record at any of the studios, you can get some of your money back. And there's like 3 tiers, I think. It starts at like...
It's much better than going to the grocery store and getting a rebate on your electric drill or something.
100%. I've had like 5 artists of mine that I work with take advantage of this and puts money back in their pocket, But yeah, you can get, starts at like 10%. I think $10,000 is you have to spend at least $10,000. But then it goes up to like, if you spend 75 grand, you get like 30% back. So it's a real incentive.
Yeah, it's amazing. That is really amazing. And I mean, even at a $10,000 recording budget, if you're traveling, you got a band, and you can get $1,000 back or something like that.
100%.
I mean, that's your whole travel. That can totally be your whole travel budget.
Totally. Yeah, it's great. I mean, we were really excited to get it, and they want to use it. They want to spend the money because they can get more money. And so it's, we have to just constantly encourage everybody that we're working with to do this. It's pretty simple. You have to turn in a budget, and then you get approved. And then I think once the record comes out or a single or something comes out, then you get the money,
Yeah.
So there's a few things you got to do, but it's nothing major,
Yeah. That's so cool. That's so cool. Hey, rock stars. Yeah, you. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? My secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, Voice Enhancement Assistant, and Nectar to make sure every episode of this podcast sounds great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, D-Click, D-Clip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, VEA, and Limiting, all from Isotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off or pick up the new Trash Light along with many of the other free cool plugins over at isotope.com. All right, great. So remember that, rock stars. Go down, visit. Take the tours.
Mm-hmm.
They're very, very fun.
Yes.
And they'll get you really excited about making music.
Mm-hmm.
And you're taking tours in places that you can, after the tour's over, you can record.
Absolutely.
All right. So tell us about your before we go there, let's talk about lessons that you learned at Fame. What were some of the first aha moments for you about being in that studio and seeing a session go down?
I mean, I learned almost everything I know about recording at Fame. I mean, that's just the truth. It was me and so many others. That was our training ground, But if, you're talking about aha moments, one of my aha moments was as a young engineer, you're trying to get good drum sounds, And so there was a bunch of young people, they're kind of coming up together. We were trying to learn how to make records and write songs and all that stuff. And I couldn't get a good drum sound. I was like, why can't I get a good drum sound? Blah, blah, blah. So one day we're doing a session and Owen Hale is the drummer. And Owen is a great session player, played on tons of country songs. He ended up touring with Leonard Skinner for a while and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, real deal session player. he came in, and I mic'd up the drums like I always mic'd up the drums, and I hear him play, and I'm going, wow, it's not me, it's the drummer,
Yeah.
So it was kind of that aha moment of like the source. The source is everything.
Yeah.
If you've got a great drummer who understands that, hitting the snare 2 inches off center is completely different than hitting in the center, or, just understands all that and understands how hard to hit the cymbals and all that. So that was, one of the things I learned for sure was just, the source material is everything.
Yeah. I feel like one of the keys to understanding those things you just described is learning how to listen as a musician too. And probably learning how to listen in the studio. Studio experience, I think, really helps too, because it is different to hear sounds in a loud bar stage environment than it is in a studio environment. They're different instruments in a way.
Totally.
And you start to discover that,
Totally.
How many times as an engineer have you gone out and you just like hit the snare and you put your hand on the snare and hit it this way and do that, and you just like hear all these sounds?
Oh yeah.
Everyone could be a great record,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And, playing the bass guitar, I mean, you can move your hand up towards the neck a few inches and it completely changes the sound. I mean, so there's all these things that, a lot of great musicians just do intuitively, but it all matters and it all adds up to making a great record,
So you got to hear some real top musicians at this point.
Yeah.
What about session workflow? Did you begin to learn what it means to be an engineer or an assistant and actually interact with a great band and, start learning how to get out of the way of the recording?
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that had happened right when I got there was Rodney Hall and his brother, Mark, maybe his other brother, Ricky, too. They decided to start a record label called Muscle Shoals Records. And the first record they did was a band called the Decoys. And the Decoys are like the Muscle Shoals house band. They've been around for a long time. There's been a lot of different members. Johnny Sandlin was in the band originally. But essentially, when I was there, it was David Hood on bass, Scott Boyer, Kelvin Holly, N.C. Thurman. And they had a bunch of different drummers, but Mike Dillon was one of them, and Jimmy Evans was one of them, and Brian Owens. But anyway, we
Brian
started
Owens, like Nashville. Brian
absolutely,
Owens?
man. Yeah,
great drummer. I've worked with him.
Yeah, I love Brian. He's fantastic. So we immediately started recording this album, and I barely know what I'm doing. I mean, honestly, they had a Pro Tools system. This was in Studio B. I cut my teeth in Studio B at Fame. It looks a lot different now.
Yeah.
Oh,
really?
Oh,
Does
yeah.
it?
Yeah, Glenn.
Which part, the control room or the live room?
Everything. Well, the live room is the same, the control room. Yeah, when Glenn came into town, and he and Rodney kind of went in together, and they completely remodeled that Studio B. And it needed it because it was like almost a complete square, which is the worst kind of shape for a control room.
Right.
And we had an Amec Angela console in there, and a Pro Tools rig. And anyway, we just jumped in feet first. I'm recording the Decoys, with Rodney producing, and
I had some question about that record, but I'm looking in my notes trying to find it. I can't find it. But anyway, there's so many great records in your playlist too, with all these artists and rock stars. Again, a reminder: scroll down after you listen to this, and click through, and we'll have a link right to Jimmy's discography, so you can just go listen. I mean, great sounding records.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, just thrown into the fire, man, jump in there and make it work. And one of the things that made a big impression on me was working with David Hood. At this point, David was already a well-known session player who had done so many amazing things.
And David Hood is bass
player.
Swampers.
He was in this. Yeah, he was he was the bass player for the Swampers, and he played the iconic bass riff on "I'll Take You There" for the Staple Singers.
Yeah.
And anyway, so many incredible records. But the point I'm getting at is he treated me so kindly. Like I said, I was very new at this as an engineer. And I remember at the time the headphones were kind of messed up. We could only give them a 2 mix. And he was just great to work with. And one of the things about David Hood is getting a bass sound on him is the easiest thing in the world. Because again, it gets back to the source and it's all in his fingers, the way he plays. It's just there, you know? You don't have to do anything to it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's... before we started this, we were down in my studio and you were checking out my Carl Tatz control room.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the first things I noticed by getting the sound right in the control room, because it's so common and easy to be able to do a bass overdub from the sweet spot in the control room direct these days, you know?
Yeah.
And I noticed that. I was like, man, it's so much fun when you can just play the bass the way you hope the finished song will sound.
Yep.
And there's so much power in that too. That's such a big impression on what the song's going to be.
Yeah, and it's the thing that I struggle with most in my mixes is getting the low end right and getting the bass right. I kind of obsess over that. It's hard, you know, and part of that is because of, you know, imperfect rooms and
so maybe talk a little bit about we could jump over to your studio now, the NuttHouse. Tell us about the NuttHouse, and then what avenues have you taken for monitoring? Because I know you like messing around with your mix monitors and stuff like that.
Well, okay, so after I left Fame, I had a studio in my house for a little while, and then I had another spot that I leased for about 3 years. But in my mind, I really wanted to own my own space. And I kept looking around town just for a spot, you know, that I could buy. And I kept driving by this bank building on 4th Street in downtown Sheffield. Had a for sale sign up for a while, and the front was all grown up. And so I finally ended up calling about it, and I guess it had been a church. It was a bank. It was 3 different banks, and then it was a church for a while. And so anyway, long story short, I bought the bank building.
Right,
and
you bought the bank.
I bought the bank building.
The bank bought me, and then I bought the bank.
Yeah, and it's incredible, man. It's like, you know, I don't know, it's got 2 floors. I think it's like 6,000 square foot or something like that. So it's a nice, sizable, well-built, you know, building. It's got 2 vaults in it. And so, yeah, I bought it and put a studio in there. I pretty much designed it all myself. I really couldn't afford to hire a studio designer, an architect. So I just kind of, you know, with what I'd learned at the time and some research,
How many bank studios are you aware of?
I'm not aware of any other. I'm sure there are.
The studio I interned at, Woodland Studios in East Nashville, was owned by Bob Solomon, and there was a point at which a tornado came through. It's not the first, no, I don't know if it was the first time, but it's not the last time because it came through again in 2020. But it took off some of the roof of Woodland, and so Bob moved the whole studio across the street to a bank.
Wow.
So it was in a bank for a little bit.
Okay.
Roger Mutino was somebody that was, you know, he's experienced engineer that I was able to, you know, go visit his studio and see what he was doing. He was over there too. But
did it stay in the bank or did it move back?
No, it didn't. It went back to being a bank later.
Okay.
The bank won. Well, so what were some things? So what was awesome about a bank as a studio location? I mean, are the walls massive? Did you use the vault somehow?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The vault is mainly for guitar cabinets or amps, you know. You couldn't really drill through the walls. It's like 18 inches of steel reinforced concrete. So, you know, I just kind of run cords through the door or whatever. But
you didn't sit there and like over a 20-year thing, like with a spoon by hand, like dig a tunnel through the wall.
No, but we did look everywhere for money. My son and I crawled on top of the vault and, you know, with the flashlight, just trying to find money. You know, we didn't find any money. Around. We found an really old Coke can and an old cigar tin.
What about those metal deposit drawers where you can like drop the deposit?
Didn't have any of those. But there was some random stuff left there. Like I said, it was a church. The last thing it was a church before I bought it. Okay. And they left like a Roland keyboard. I forget the the model, but it's like from the late 80s, early 90s Roland keyboard that they left, and a bunch of file cabinets and a kneeling pad.
My last dumb question about bank turned studio. If plus you're working with Capones, but I'm just making up stupid shit. But I picture the classic bank holdup, and then somebody reaches under the counter and they press the button for the alarm.
Yeah.
Were you able to repurpose the button as your talkback? That's what I wanted.
No, I'd never found the button. But what's interesting is the vault had a time lock on it. So if you got locked in the vault after 5 o'clock, you would have to spend the night in there.
Wow.
And so there's a mechanical air pump in there that still works perfectly. You just pull this lever and turn it, and air gets pumped into the vault.
Right, because otherwise you wouldn't be there. You'd be there in the morning, but
dead.
You wouldn't be able to say hello.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to say hello. So, but this is all 50, like I said, built in 54, 55, something like that. So it's, but the little air pump still works perfectly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Anything nutty about the NuttHouse other than you?
It's all nutty all the time. We're musicians. I mean,
Well, so you didn't have to worry about your inside to outside walls. They were thick.
Not too bad. I mean, there's
windows probably still let
there's
sound
2 teller windows. And so when a loud truck goes by, you can kind of hear it. But, it's not an issue. I mean, Muscle Shoals sound on Jackson Highway, I mean, if it rained really hard, they would have to stop recording. I mean, you can overcome these things. So it works. But I have 2 ISO booths that are, totally, you're totally isolated. You don't get any leakage in those. And I mainly cut drums out in the big room anyway. So, a truck driving by is not going to hurt anything.
Right. But, and I mean, once it drives by, usually it's gone.
It's gone. Right. So it's buried deep in.
And that wasn't the keeper take anyway.
Well, it might be. There might be truck sounds in all my records that no one's ever heard. But
well, very cool. Well, so then, did you? What about decisions you made for what you're going to put in your studio?
Well, at the time, I had already just kind of started collecting gear. So I had a pretty good collection of outboard preamps and gear. I didn't have a console at the time, but I had a Pro Control and a kind of a desk built around a Pro Control and outboard preamps. And, it's just been a slow build for me. You just kind of get this, you save up, you get this piece of gear, you save up, you get this piece of gear.
So do you feel like when you opened that place, you started with a lot of space and not a lot of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
for sure.
So you had a lot of room to grow.
I
slowly
did.
If you wanted.
Absolutely. Because like I said, I'm building this thing as I go. But I mean, I had enough to track a band. I had enough converters and enough preamps to track a band, and I had a bunch of different flavors of preamps. But I wanted a console, and that was something that I experienced working at Fame. They had a Neve 8232 in Studio A, and then we had the Amec Angela in B. Mm-hmm. And I knew that workflow, and I loved that workflow of cutting tracks through an analog console. So that was on my radar. Took me a long time to figure out what I wanted, though.
Which console, or just?
Yeah, which console. Yeah. I actually put a down payment on a Sony 3000 with Randy Blevins. And
that was like the Sony post-MCI kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could drop little like John Hardy modules, or I think maybe even API modules in them. But Dave Barbie had one that is what piqued my interest. I went to his studio in Athens, Georgia, and talked to him about it. But Randy was kind of dragging his feet going through the console, and I got tired of waiting, and so he was cool, gave me my money back, the deposit.
Love you, Randy. We love you, Randy.
We love Randy. Randy has got me out of binds many times with tape machine. He's actually spent the night at my house a couple of times, come down and work on my tape machine all day and spend the night. But it worked out good, because I don't think I would have been happy with that console long term.
It looks like you ended up with something pretty cool.
Yeah, I landed on a Trident 80B, and kind of after I figured out that I really like preamps with transformers, and I like the way that sounds. And so that's what an 80B is. It has transformers on the preamps, and it's just a great sounding console. I bought it from Vintage King. Came out of a studio in Brooklyn. I'm not sure which one.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, bought it, had it completely gone through, recapped, clean. We have a great tech in our area that's a block away from me. His name's Greg Pace. He has a company called Funkworks, and he's been working on all the studios in the Shoals for a long, long time, and he's a treasure to our community for sure. He's custom built a lot of stuff for Matt Ross Spang, his studio in Memphis. He custom built some preamps for Matt out of some old UA pre's.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to see Matt's new studio. We talked about it
cool.
on the podcast.
Yeah, it's cool.
But I was there. I was in Memphis on the day where he was not there or something like that.
Yeah, we went to the grand opening last year, and it was really cool. I love Matt.
And he's got such a good sense of style.
He does. He's a great guy. I really, really like Matt a lot.
No matter what style of music you create, Native Instruments provides you all the instruments you need, from drums, loops, and beats to vintage and modern synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I really enjoy recording real bands in my studio, but then adding amazing overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, or Hybrid keys. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get complete start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. Matt did turn me on to the listening lab when we were, I can't remember if it was on the podcast or when I visited, and he said I should stop by, and I got a chance to peek in the door, and that was Rockstars in Memphis. Now we're talking about again, an amazing music scene.
Totally.
Something about the South down here.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta love it. But, the listening lab is essentially a community library of vinyl.
Absolutely. It's amazing.
You
I
walk
didn't.
right in and pull a record down and listen.
Did you go into one of the rooms and listen?
I didn't. I just got a
do
chance.
that
They were
either.
closing, but they let me walk in and just take a selfie,
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't go into one of the rooms and listen, but yeah, it's an amazing place just to be there and look at all the vinyl on the wall.
Yeah. The fun thing about doing this music stuff is just the experience of like going and seeing these things and being around it. It's so energizing, and it makes you want to go make music. I mean, I just went and watched an artist. I walked 2 blocks down to the Cobra and watched an artist that I work with play a live show. And I even watched an opening band I didn't know anything about. And they were like, they had things that were cool about them. They had other things where I'm like, well, that's not very in tune, whatever. But like I laughed, and I was like, all of a sudden I'm like humming songs in my head. And it's what I love about music. It's like, it's so easy for us to get inspired to just want to make some music.
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess you could say I'm obsessed with music. I don't know. It just did hit me like a ton of bricks when I was 12, 13 years old. And it's just consumed me ever since then. And I love it, Well,
let's talk about a little bit more about your studio. You were mentioning monitors.
Yes.
Tell us about your experience of trying to get everything to sound right.
Oh, man. I've been through a bunch of iterations. I had Genelec 1031As, I think they are. For many years, those were my go-tos, and had the big Genelec sub that went with it. And I don't know, man. It's just been this quest for me, this search, to get not necessarily flat, but a flat room, but just something you can trust, where you can put things where you want them and hear it in other places, and it's where you think it needs to be. So I've done a lot of research on my own, learned how to shoot my room out. I use Room EQ Wizard. I bought a measurement microphone. I've studied as much as I possibly can, and where I ended up is had a few conversations with Carl Tatz and kind of stopped short of pulling the trigger on getting a Phantom Focus system, but used a lot of his concepts and ideas. I bought a couple of subs from him and put them in the corners, and I bought some Dyne Audio M1s and bought an Ashley speaker processor, which allows me to time align the speakers and EQ the speakers, and I'm pretty happy with what I'm getting, but there's always room for improvement. And actually, recently I hooked my NS10s up and put them back up.
Did you?
And so I kind of go.
Occasionally, I miss my NS10s. I think I need to fix it and get them back up somehow in the control room.
I've had a kind of a love-hate relationship with those things for many years, but I think I finally get it. I think I finally understand what it is that they do that people love, that works, I should say.
And what do you think it is?
I mean, it's the mid-range, it's the low mids and the mid-range. They just put it in your face and you have to deal with it, I've been fortunate to work with a guy named Jim Gaines on and off, and Jim actually is an incredible engineer and producer, worked with Santana and Huey Lewis and the News and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and he lives in our area and has a home studio, but uses my studio frequently to do overdubs and bigger sessions. But anyway, my point is, he's always been on NS10s, like his whole career. And
with sub or no sub?
He's got a sub. You got to have a sub. I mean, occasionally I'll turn the subs off and just listen to NS10s, but you got to have, they're not going to.
They won't push low end without them.
No,
But when I think about mixing, so much of what I really need to get right in the mix
is the low end.
It's the low end, but it's all those mids.
Well, that's the
low end. I feel like is something that I just want to check.
Sure.
Sometimes.
Good point. Yeah, and the mid range is what translates everywhere, whether it's a grocery store overhead speaker or your iPhone or some systems are going to reproduce the low end, some aren't. But the mid range is what translates everywhere, and so I actually will, switch between the NS10s and the non-audios with the subs on, and it kind of works,
Are you able to share a sub between both sets of speakers?
Yes, because the Ashley speaker processor basically has 8 ins and 8 outs, and so I can turn the subs on and off, and it's basically a speaker selector as well. And so the subs, I had tuned the subs with the Dyne Audios, but somehow it just works with the NS10s as well, like really well.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Like you didn't have to change the settings on it.
No, and I haven't EQ'd the NS10s at all. I just leave those alone, but the subs are tuned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you feel like part of it is just you learn what the sound is in your control room and then you just start making moves?
Totally. I mean, I've been in that room for 15 years now, so I should know it. Some days I question whether I know it or not, but do the best I can.
Well, if we didn't still have an ability to get it wrong, what would that mean about our ability to get it right?
True. Very true.
Okay. So different speaker setups, you got your control room dialed in, you're accumulating gear over time, you got your console. What about the live space? Because when I listen to your records, you do a lot of acoustic ensembles too.
Mm-hmm.
And in those, I particularly feel like I'm aware of the sound of the room.
Cool.
So I don't know where that's coming from. I want you to talk about that stuff, but I'm guessing that you maybe recognize that as an important element of an acoustic ensemble recording.
I do. Yeah, I love having the room be part of the recording, and especially what you were talking about acoustic music, but especially drums. I have the drums out in the big room, and I love to have room mics and capture that sound. But the Steel Drivers record, for instance, I mean, they all sat up in a circle in the big room. We had some big foam pads that I borrowed from Mac McNally and, kind of had some dividers in between them.
Yeah.
And I did throw up some room mics, actually. I think
where do you put the room mics if people are in a circle? How do you think about that?
I just had a couple room mics, kind of one on each side. I don't know how much they made it into the mix. I'm trying to remember. We didn't do a whole lot of overdubs, but there were some overdubs. So some of the songs I couldn't use the room mics for whatever reason. But I do remember sneaking them in. But just being in that room, even with close mics, you're going to get the room sound.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. Is because there's so many big open mics potentially.
Totally.
In a circle, you're just going to hear the room.
Totally.
And one instrument bleeds over to the other side a little bit. Maybe
Absolutely.
Gives it that 3D. What about when you visualize and you're like, all right, I'm about to do this session. I don't want to put you on the spot I can't remember every detail of every session I've done, but some do stick out.
Sure.
But like, what's the instrument ensemble in that group and the steel drivers? And when you're picturing like, all right, I'm about to set these guys up, where are you putting the instruments?
Okay.
Are you thinking about your stereo mix as you're even looking through the window at this circle of musicians?
Yeah, I mean, it's, upright bass, banjo, fiddle, mandolin, and acoustic. It's kind of your traditional bluegrass setup, which, I mean, like, I didn't grow up listening to bluegrass. It was not something that I was steeped in at all. I mean, I really appreciate it now, and I really love it, and I love the steel drivers. But again, we're talking on the job training here,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember asking Brent Truitt. Brent Truitt is the mandolin player for the steel drivers. And Brent is a great engineer, has a great studio here, does really cool records. And I was like, hey, where should I put this mic? I mean, I'm not afraid to ask. I mean, I want it to be right. I'm not going to, let my ego get in the way. And he actually brought his own KM. I don't know if it was an 84 or 184.
For which instrument?
For the mandolin,
Oh,
and
cool.
it kind of is in between his legs, kind of looking up at the instrument a little bit, and I probably wouldn't have put it there, to begin with. And this is somebody that does a lot of bluegrass records, so I'm going to ask,
Yeah, I learned that same thing too early on in sessions. I'd have some idea what I want to do, and then I just think like, why not ask the musician? Is there a place you commonly
Absolutely.
record this? And depending on who you ask, some musicians maybe won't have an idea,
right?
Or maybe
some
they'll have
some
a bad
will, some
idea,
won't.
but
Yeah.
a lot of times they'll know, and I've gotten suggestions where it sounds great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we kind of started out with the idea of cutting it live, all in the same room. I think we pretty quickly made the decision to put Tammy King, the fiddle player, wonderful player, in a booth, because the fiddle just gets in everything,
Does it really?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's just...
So it's not everything gets in the fiddle mic. The fiddle gets in everything.
Yeah,
it's like
absolutely.
a tambourine.
Yeah, it's like a tambourine or a triangle.
Right.
Yeah. But so we ended up putting her in a booth, and then we had the upright bass, the banjo, the mandolin, and then Gary Nichols playing acoustic and singing. And I ended up using a stereo mic on his acoustic because I was thinking about kind of the sound field and where everything would go. And, with bluegrass, what's interesting with bluegrass is you kind of you just have these elements.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't add anything. You can't add, a tambourine or drums or, you're kind of stuck with these 4 or 5 elements. And so where you place them and how you record them becomes pretty important, And so anyway, it worked out really well. The upright bass, I ended up doing a mic, kind of a tube mic on the low, and then like a small diaphragm up top, which was what Alan Schulman, who was my main mentor.
Which one was that again? Say that one again.
On the upright bass.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Great. Because I was going to ask you about upright bass. Is one of those classic. I get to ask that one until my last question of my life. I'm gonna be asking that question.
I've got a nugget for you. So like I said, Alan Schulman, great engineer. He was a mentor of mine, taught me a lot. That was the way he mic'd upright basses, is kind of a low and a high, And so that's what I did, and it worked pretty good, but I was never 100% happy with the upright sound I got on that record.
Describe that first low-high, unless we're supposed to forget that technique.
Well, I think there's a better way, but yeah, I mean, essentially you're kind of putting one mic kind of down towards the bridge in that area, and then you're putting one up where the left hand is, to kind of get some higher frequencies. But what you kind of miss in that is kind of the meat where the fingers hit the strings and the kind of low mids, because those instruments have tons of low end. So you're really not looking to accentuate that.
Right.
So the great Norbert Putnam, another Muscle Shoals icon, he was actually in the first Muscle Shoals rhythm section. This is Norbert Putnam and David Briggs and Jerry Kerrigan. And, I guess Junior Lowe might have been involved in that too. But Norbert was from the Shoals and was in the first rhythm section, ended up moving to Nashville. And he ended up becoming one of the first call session players here in town. This would have been 60s, I think. And so he did a lot of upright sessions. And Norbert has great stories, and he's just a fantastic guy to talk to. But he said, Jimmy, take a U87, put it where the right hand fingers hit the strings, and you're done. And I was like, what? You're kidding me. And so I've done that ever since, and it works.
U87, so...
Now, it doesn't have to be a U87. I've been using an RCA44, which I think I like even better. But man, that's where it is. You get it down low, you just get boom.
Right.
And you end up having to filter it out and everything else. And so if you're just right where the right hand is plucking the strings, and you can play with the distance, I mean, it just works.
So you got to position the plucking mic right.
You got to position the plucking mic right. That's right correct.
All right.
We both said that.
Well, that's cool. And it really can be a challenge. One of the things that I feel like I've discovered about upright too is the instrument has to actually be in a space that's appropriate as well, right?
Yeah, and that instrument, it has to be a good instrument. That right. Plays into it big time.
Yeah.
Yeah, all those things. I found a little sweet spot in my studio that I like to put the upright in. And Matt Ross Spang and Ben Tanner just recently did the last Blind Boys album at the NuttHouse. And they had Dennis Crosby down playing upright. And he's an amazing player. And he shows up with his own microphones. He's got one of the old Birdcage, Altec Birdcage. Wow. And I think they might have had a 44 too, but anyway, they got a great upright sound on him as well. And I think it was right around the area I'm talking about, around his plucking hand.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I did session once with Dave Jakes, a bass player here, played with John Prine. And he hit me to a thing, same thing, it's like this has worked before. I'm like, great, I'll try it. And it was a 2 mic, but it was one that was doing the bass thing, and then one was a small diaphragm between the fingerboard, the fretboard, and the bridge, looking up the fretboard.
I've heard about that, yeah.
To the hand. So it's kind of the same thing where it's like in the vicinity of the plucking, but it was sort of looking up the neck. And what I realize as I'm thinking about that is because it would have been a cardioid pattern. It's going to reject less and less of the lows.
Sure.
So it's actually going to pick up. It's almost like it was an omni in that same area you're talking about.
Yeah.
But then the highs are pointing up towards the fingerboard, so you're getting some of the finger action and stuff. It's fun. I mean, it's fun to experiment with upright bass techniques. It sucks to experiment with it when the session downbeat is coming up around,
Oh yeah.
5 minutes later, and you're still trying to figure out how to get a good upright bass sound.
It's tough, man. It's one of those instruments where, again, it gets back to the player and the instrument, and all those things really matter with that. I've had bands come in before with an upright bass player, and there's nothing. I don't know what to do. Yeah, there's nothing I could have done to make it sound right because it was not a great upright bass. They didn't have the right technique, and it's just what also sucks about it, I think if we didn't know any better, maybe it wouldn't bother us so much. But when you grow up recording electric basses, which go pluck and then a nice sustained note, even a bad one, you can sure
kind of coax it into a good sound. And then you go to an upright and you're trying to figure out what to do, and all it does is just go woof.
Yeah.
And then, and then you're not sure where to set the bass level in the mix, and you don't hear any notes. That's what gets so frustrating about it. Now, what about, so like Jason Isbell, the Magician, excuse me.
Oh, yeah.
That one is like a big, warm acoustic full band sound, and you've got that big kind of pillowy kick drum, and that's accompanied with maybe acoustic or electric bass. What are some things that you've discovered about the soft, pillowy combination of low end and how to get that right? What are ways that we screw up? Is it do we start thinking modern kick drum and we're like getting beater in there where it doesn't need to be? Is it the way the drums sound to begin with?
Yeah, okay. So I think that song, The Magician, if I'm not mistaken, was on his first record, Sirens of the Ditch. And that would have been Brad Morgan from the Drive-By Truckers, who played drums on most of that record. I think Mike Dillon played on a couple songs. And he was, I don't remember. I think it was like a 24-inch kick drum with I think it was a full front head. I mean, that was
Right.
that was his deal,
So that's a little bit of the sound. Is the
That
drum
is the
needs
sound,
to,
yeah. And if it had a hole, it was just a smaller one. It wasn't a big hole in the middle or anything like that. And so, that's the way those drums sound. You're not going to get a lot of beater because you can't really stick a mic up in there.
But when you're the engineer, you're looking at it and you're like, that's cool, but where am I supposed to put my mic? So what kind of things are good starting points for a full front head kick drum? Short of trying to convince the drummer to cut a hole in their drum, which
Well,
maybe may not be the right move.
No, that's not the right move. I mean, I approach it like I approach a snare, where the mic is kind of off on the edge, maybe the top edge of the drum, looking down at the center of the drum. That's kind of the way I mic a snare drum, where it's up over the edge of the drum, pointing towards the center of the drum.
Right.
And
So now we're thinking about are we putting a mic on the beater side of the kick drum, or are we putting it on
the front?
On the front.
On the front.
But
Yep.
we're imagining that if you turned the kick up sideways, so it was like
a snare, yeah.
like a snare, like a giant snare in the room,
Mm-hmm.
the same place that you would put the mic if it was a snare.
Yep.
You're just recreating that
Yep.
on the kick drum. Wow, that's interesting. So
Yep.
you're usually above the drum looking down.
I'm usually above the drum
so
looking
it might
down.
that mic might be getting some of the toms and snare in
Totally.
it too and everything.
Totally.
You're not trying to fight that.
No, not trying to fight that. And it's probably like a condenser of some sort. I'm not sure. Now, there have been times when I've just put like a Beta 52 or a D112 or whatever was around. I think at Fame we had a D112. And there would be times that I would just, on the same scenario, I would put just one on the front head facing forward, but not in the center. Still would be off of the center a little bit. I feel like in the center you don't get the tone of the drum as much. So on a full head kick drum, that is. But so yeah, that was a big part of it, was the actual kick drum that he used.
You don't get the tone of the kick drum. Is it sort of like the upright where you get the boom of it, but not the tone or something?
No, it's almost, to me, in the center of it, with a kick with a full head, it's like, I don't know, you don't get the resonance. You just kind of you get air. I don't know. You don't get the resonance of the drum.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's just a good reminder to us. I mean, sometimes we look at a drum, we think, oh, that's the drum head. That must be where something goes. Or we just see what other people do and we start by thinking that must be what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I mean, you hit a drum and the sound is coming out of the sides of the wood. It's coming out of the head. It's coming out of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then there's also the option of like where you're standing. Does it sound cool to you? Well, maybe that's where the mic goes,
Absolutely.
A lot of stuff to experiment with.
Yeah, and I think on that track in particular, I think he was just doing like brushes or something on the snare. He wasn't like stick. So again, the bleed didn't really matter,
Yeah. Rockstars, I got an idea for you. This is just a tip for how to explore drum sounds. Set up your iPhone, do a video shot of the drum kit, roll a session, and have a drummer just play and then just scoot mics around a little bit so that you see it on the video, so that later you just import that into your session and you can go back, and when you stumble on something and you're like, that was my favorite, you could probably go back and look at the video like, what did I do? And then, oh, that's right. That's when I moved it over to the left a little.
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole. It is a rabbit hole you can go down. I've been on this search for the perfect overhead mics for a while, and I don't think I'm there yet, but my favorite overheads I've ever had was a pair of C12As that a buddy of mine had. They looked like 414s, and they said Norelco on them,
Oh, cool.
And God, they sounded so good on overheads, and they were on loan. I had them for a few years, and he had to sell them, and I didn't have $6,000 at the time, and so he sold them, which in retrospect, I should have bought them because they're probably worth 12 now. But
And well, it's anything. If you can find the perfect mic for all your records, that's worth a lot right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, if I could go back in time, I would take out a loan and buy those microphones because they were incredible.
Atom Audio is celebrating 25 years of researching, developing, and manufacturing industry-leading monitoring solutions in Berlin. To mark this milestone, our friends at Atom Audio are unveiling a special limited edition series of monitors that will look stunning in your studio and sound as awesome as your music. Introducing the Arctic White A4V and A7V series. Available for a limited time to pro and home studio owners like yourself, the clean, glossy white finish exudes a luxurious feel and will stand out in any studio or home audio system. Featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design and customizable speaker voicings, the Arctic White A4V and A7V retain the full specifications of the original design. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Atom Audio's commitment to delivering professional-grade, high-fidelity sound to studios worldwide has made these monitors a perfect fit for Grammy-winning producers in both pro and home studios for a quarter of a century. Now you can bring that beautiful high-fidelity sound to your own productions and make your studio look as cool as your music sounds. Don't miss out on the limited edition Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a short time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. I am really impressed with Isotope Ozone. I've been mastering many of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy to get a fantastic sound. The built-in mastering assistant helps by analyzing the mix and suggesting all the settings needed for a professionally mastered result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You just adjust the settings to your taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means you can manipulate the level of the vocal, bass, and drums even at the mastering stage. Amazing. My bandmates are pretty demanding, but now when I send off the masters for approval, they absolutely love the way our records sound thanks to Isotope. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Ozone or other tools like RX and Voice Enhancement Assistant, or grab any of the cool free plugins like the new Trash Light at isotope.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the second half of the show, aka the jam session. My guest today is Jimmy Nutt, joining us here at Podzilla. I'm going to keep switching the name of the studio every time.
Pod.
I think my favorite, I think this came from Chris Shaw, was Pod, damn it.
I love it.
And you ready to jam?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. So we just left off with a little drum stuff. Maybe I'll ask a couple more questions. See if I can find the one that I was thinking of. But Donna Jean Godshaw Band.
Yes.
Some good stuff to say about just the tone and sound of that record.
Thank you.
Rich, crisp, full band sound.
Thank you.
We were just listening to music down in the studio.
Yeah.
Who were we listening to? It was
let's see. You listened to Sean Colvin.
Sean Colvin, right?
Small Repairs record. Yeah.
And we were talking about how that's got like that. You kind of want to hear that. It's like a pleasant, hard edge to the sound. It's like solid.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Donna Jean Godshaw record, I also made a note that it's got a great sort of snare room verb thing going on. It's tucked in just right.
Yeah.
And that just reminds me, that's like a classic challenge in drums. Like we can get a great drummer, we can mic it up right, we can do all these cool mixing things, but in the end, it's like we also want it to sound like it just cohesive in a package sound. of the drums that we like. And sometimes that involves doing something cool to the snare with the verb and stuff like that. So what are some things that you've found work really well for you in your studio? Does it get recorded on a drum room mic and get that sound, or is it sometimes a mixing thing?
There's always, I always have room mics up when I'm cutting drums. But there's a lot of cool things to say about Donna Jean Godchaux just in general and that record. So if I can just talk a little bit about that.
Please do.
So Donna is from the Shoals. She grew up in the Shoals, and she became a background singer. Ended up singing on When a Man Loves a Woman and a bunch of cool early Muscle Shoals records.
Yeah.
Ended up going and singing on an Elvis record from Elvis in Memphis. She's got a cool picture in her hallway of young Elvis with his arms around her and the other background singers. It's amazing. So she's a close friend of ours. She moved off to San Francisco at some point and became a member of the Grateful Dead.
Oh, wow. Yeah, right on.
Yeah, so she was in the Grateful Dead in the 70s, and her husband moved back to the Shoals. Her husband's name is David McKay, and they're some of our best friends. And that particular record was kind of, Donna hadn't done anything in a while, and she wanted to make a solo record, and there were songs that she had written. And so she approached me to help her with that. And David McKay, her husband, played bass on it. And but the drums in particular, is a really cool drummer named Pete Lavazzoli. I think I'm saying his name right. He played on the road with Donna in some different bands over the years. And he has a really unique style of playing drums. On that record, he had sizzles on all of his cymbals.
Right on.
I've never seen a drummer do that. And it worked. It was so cool.
Let's describe that. So for the rock stars who don't know what a sizzle on a cymbal is.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can use like a chain from like a fan, and just kind of attach it to the cymbal. When you hit the cymbal, it rattles. But
right, so it's attached to the screw at the top center.
Yeah.
And then it just sort of drapes down across the cymbal so that when you hit it, it sort of dances and vibrates on top of the metal a little bit, right?
Yeah, and they you can buy them. They make them. You can buy one from Sweetwater or whatever that kind of fits on the stand and hangs over the cymbal. But actually, I think his cymbals actually had sizzles in them where you put holes in the cymbals, and I think they're rivets.
Yeah,
and you hit the cymbal and it vibrates, and all those rivets just kind of dance. Yeah, it's a really cool sound. But Pete has a really nice touch on drums, and I mean, just speaking of snare, I love the way he hits the snare. He just really has a great balance. And so, yeah, I feel like we got some really great drum sounds. At the time, there was a late 60s drum set, Ludwig drum set in my studio that belonged to a local drummer named Justin Holder. He's since moved that over to Fame, I think. Darn him. But anyway, I had him for years, so I can't complain. But so anyway, it was a great drum kit in a really cool room with a great drummer, and there were definitely room mics. I generally do put reverb on snares. I like the way that sounds.
How do you do that? What's the technique, the process for doing that?
I kind of have all the drums going to their own bus, which actually is now a folder track. And then I have a drum reverb set up, and I'll send the snare, normally the snare and the toms. I've been playing around a little bit lately with maybe just sending a little bit of kick to the verb every now and then.
Yeah, there's so many great records where you go listen, you're like, there's reverb on that kick.
It can be really cool. It can be very cool. And so
especially I feel like that works really well if the kick is also kind of gets its own moment in a recording.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, it's generally, like a plate or something, but I also in my template, in my mix template now, I have kind of a short room and actually have a non-linear, like
So this might be in the box mixing at this point.
Yeah. I've pretty much, my whole career has mainly been mixing in the box.
Really interesting. So you got the console, but the console might be more of the recording.
It's the front end. Yeah. Everything, goes through the console. I use all outboard. I've got some great compressors, and I've got the board, the EQs on the board, and preamp. I use all that stuff going in, but pretty much most everything I've mixed has been in the box.
That's cool. So a reminder, Rockstars, a way to think about that console is get it to create the sound you want at the capture. You're trying to get it to sound as much like you want that record to be, maybe.
Absolutely.
While the band's performing, capture it, and then you don't have to worry about it. You can just
Absolutely
use the power of mixing in the box at that point.
When I got the console, of course, I wanted to mix through it, and I did for a while. I did a few records where I kind of split out, mixed through the console. But there's this really cool free plugin from Hoffa called Blind Test.
Oh, cool.
And
I
recommend that to everybody because you have to have a way to compare things in a non-biased way. So what I would do is I would have a mix and I would split it out through several channels of the console. I might use an outboard stereo compressor to run the mix through. And then I would do a mix in Pro Tools. And then you can put those two mixes side by side, level match them with this Blind Test plugin. You kind of close your Pro Tools windows, and there's kind of a shuffle button. And then you hit play, and you go back and forth between those two mixes. And
it does it in such a way that you don't know which one you're listening to.
You don't know which one you're listening to. There's no clicks or pops. You got to get the level match perfectly because if one's louder, you're going to pick that one every time.
Right.
But when you do all that right, and you listen to a mix that went through the console and one that didn't, my experience has been, first of all, it's very subtle. And second of all, it's about 50-50. Sometimes I would pick the Pro Tools mix. Sometimes I would pick the one ran through the console. So at that point, the advantages of being in the box just outweigh it.
I think that's a good takeaway, is remembering that we're always dealing with pros and cons of every decision we make. Like, there's something good about it, but then there's something that's disadvantageous about it.
Sure. Yeah,
so it's like just selecting the right move for the right part of the session you're doing.
Yeah, if I had a big SSL or something, maybe I would mix on it with all the, recallability and the automation and all that. My Trident doesn't even have automation on it. So it would just be essentially a summing kind of a thing. And it just was not that big of an advantage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, again, I think sometimes people mistake convenience as chosen because it's like, people might think, you're not doing something that's a little bit hard because it's convenient. Or I'm describing the internal process that we go through about ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we might think that, but then we have to remember that in some situations, the ability to work quickly and go from song to song and get right to it you could be opening up a whole world of advantages that you're missing when you do it the slow way too. So it's just remembering to really think hard about our process and don't assume that because we're changing something because it might simplify that somehow we're losing something or whatever. Or like you said, in your case, it was just you listened to both and you're like, it's just not that much of a difference.
No. And it's,
or you had already gotten the sound because you captured it through that.
Yeah. That gets back to our earlier conversation. And, in this context, it's about the song and the performance.
Yeah.
If you've got a great song and a great performance, I don't care what you mix it on. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
And that's just, the way it is. There's so many countless, examples of that through history of, even Led Zeppelin records. I've been going back and listening to some Led Zeppelin records in my studio, which I love. Those, to me, when I was young, driving down the road with my friends, listening to Led Zeppelin, those were the hugest sounding records, biggest sounding rock records I'd ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
And you compare them to records today, they don't hardly have any low end. It's just, it's interesting how we think something is huge and what makes it sound huge. And I think with Zeppelin records, it's the room sounds. You hear John Bonham in a room, you're not hearing close mics, but that's what makes it sound huge. It's not huge because it has a lot of bottom end. It's huge because you're hearing the room.
Yeah. And I remember hearing that Jimmy Page was also would put mics. He'd record his guitars from weird
Sure.
angles and stuff, right?
Absolutely.
So it was like it wasn't just a 57 jammed up on the amp.
Yeah.
And so probably like that combination of the room on the guitar with the room and the space on the drums.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the bass story is too, but it gives you some of that too. In fact, I was watching this artist play their show at the club recently, and he had his guitar amp cranked up, and I'm standing back in the room, and I'm hearing all this low end coming out of it. That I was like, shit, like I haven't actually heard him do that in the studio. Like we just set up for what's going to work, 57 or whatever on the amp, and then we're in the control room and we're dialing things in according to that, choosing guitar pedals. But it's like there's a whole world of possibility by getting the mic away from the amp and filling up the room with space that I need to explore. So that was kind of fun for me too. Do you find that sometimes you go interact with the musicians you work with outside of your studio and you discover whole new things about them that you hadn't heard?
Totally. And I think most guitar players, and I'm not talking about seasoned session guys necessarily, but I'm talking more bands and kind of guitar players, on sessions that may not be seasoned session players or whatever. I've had this happen to me so many times. They come in, you stick a 57 on the speaker, and they come into the control room and hear the guitar sound, and they're just like, they don't like it, because they're used to hearing their amp in a room and standing in front of it. It's not what they're used to hearing. Yeah. And so, a lot of times I will add a room mic or just, move the mic off the speaker, I mean, sometimes it is great to jam a 57 in an amp. That's a great sound, but that's not the only sound.
Right. That's just one of them.
That's one of them. Sometimes I'll take a U87 and just move it back 4 feet, and that's perfect,
Yeah. I guess, it's interesting to hear you say that, and I've heard that too. I've heard people, why can't it sound like it sounded when I was out there? And then I go out there and I'm like, what do I do? Particularly when I was younger, like, it would worry me. Now I just get excited. I'd be like, hell yeah.
Let's try whatever, man.
Sound, But like, options would be, and it makes sense. Like if the guitar player is used to hearing it where they're standing, then the sounds they're making out of their guitar are done in a way that makes it so that the sound hits their ear and it's appropriate.
Absolutely.
So then you're like, all right, well, maybe I should just put a mic where your
head is,
and see what that sounds like.
Yeah.
But then the next question is, okay, but if you did that, then do you move them back into the control room? Will that make them think it sounds right? Maybe it won't, It might. Maybe you just need the guitar player out by the amp. Sure. And that's the way to do it.
Yeah. It's a lot of trial and error. I mean, it's being open to trying different things and being open to listening to the feedback you're getting, from the musicians or the artists or whatever.
And if you're getting feedback, literally trying to get guitar feedback, then you really got to think about, are you out near the amp or are you in the control room?
Yeah, and the reason I made the distinction between, seasoned session players, those guys usually have their rigs dialed in such a way that it's, you're going to get what you get from them in the control room, even with the 57 on the speaker, is going to be great. I mean, they've got their rig dialed in for that, and so anyway, that's kind of why I made that distinction.
Well, it's one of the cool things about creating a big studio, if you do the writer's room kind of design where everything's all in one space, then you have options like, okay, we're going to have the amp in the control room, play the guitar. Maybe you can you're sitting close to the speakers and you just hear the music coming out of the speakers. Yeah. Maybe that works,
Gosh, Jim Gaines told me a story. I think it was on the Steve Miller record. He did the early Steve Miller stuff, and he said that Steve had his amp in the control room. He had his amp under the board.
Wow.
While they were tracking.
Oh, that's a cool way to do it.
Yeah. For whatever reason, I don't remember what the reason was.
Maybe he was sort of playing, producer, engineer seat.
I guess. I can't remember what it was, but
Maybe there was only one room to record the drums in, and they didn't want it. They wanted the amp isolated.
Well, Jim also has this great story of working with Stevie Ray Vaughan. He did the In Step record, which was the first record Stevie did when he got sober. And Stevie wanted to play through 10 amps all at once.
It's like, if I can't drink,
yeah,
we're going to use a lot of amps.
So Jim said it was an incredible challenge, and the buzz was just incredible. I mean, everything was just buzzing.
Yeah.
And so they actually built
a lot of ground loops.
Yes. Well, they built this cage out of chicken wire that Stevie would have to stand in.
Oh, great.
And stand
a Faraday cage.
Yeah, a Faraday cage. He built one that Stevie would have to stand in. It was the only way they could make these 10 amps, work.
And they said it worked.
I guess so.
Man, I got to build a Faraday cage for the studio.
Yeah.
I'm dying to hear what that might sound like.
Yeah.
We did a guitar overdub the other day, and his guitar was buzzing, and so I'm like, well, let's find out. He'd reach over and touch certain pedals, and it would go away. And finally, it's like, all right, well, we don't need to know what it was, but if you're touching the pedal, it goes away. So one of the pedals had two outputs, and we were using one of them. So I just was like, all right, here you go, get ready for this. And I grabbed a second guitar cable, plugged it into the other output, and I was like, stick this down your pants.
Totally.
And so he sticks it.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a sense of humor about it, but sticks it down the side so that it's touching, butt or whatever. And sure enough, buzz goes right away, and all of a sudden we're like, man, that guitar sounds so clean right now. That was awesome.
I've seen people take a knife, like a kitchen, knife, and put a wire and just attach it to like a knob on their guitar or something. Same thing, just ground the guitar to your body.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works,
Yeah, just don't get struck by lightning at the same time.
No.
All right, cool. So thanks for talking more about the drums. That's great.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. Let me back up and ask some more questions about some of these records you did. So Steel Drivers, again, everybody's in a circle. For recording like that, would you record the vocals at the same time? Or is it smart to do scratch vocals and then overdub harmonies, et cetera?
Well, Gary Nichols was the lead singer at the time. He is a great singer. He took Chris Stapleton's place in that band. And, my recollection is that a large majority of that record were live vocals that he sang while they were tracking. They overdubbed backgrounds. I know that for sure. But I think a lot of the vocals were him singing and playing live. I mean, that we wanted to, that was the vibe we were going for, and he can do it.
Yeah.
100%.
And the background vocals sound great. They
They're
sound
awesome.
like somebody's just singing there right next to them.
And they did those here in Nashville. I didn't cut the backgrounds. I sent them the tracks, and Tammy and Mike, the bass player, they did the backgrounds up here and sent them to me, and I imported them, and then we mixed the record. But yeah, I think those were mostly live vocal takes, playing and singing live, which is a challenge. But I mean, it's you get something different, when you do it that way, and I think it obviously worked on that record. But I mean, there are no rules. I mean, there's if you don't have a singer like Gary Nichols that can absolutely do it, then you're going to be causing problems for yourself because the vocals then you might need to isolate that guy. You might need to isolate the vocalist.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of ways you can do it. But, that was just a discussion we had up front. Like, hey, let's go for it as live as we can. You know?
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM artists, TV and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need amazing sounds that instantly elevate our music to the desired style. That's why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit, offering a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you're into hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, dance beats, or orchestral arrangements, the Native Instruments Complete Bundle has it all. From drums, loops, and beats to synths, realistic strings, vintage bass, guitars, and keys, it's a comprehensive collection. I love recording real bands in my studio, but then enhancing the tracks with drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. It's a surefire way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. And again, then that starts begging the question about if you're going to position everybody where you're thinking about your stereo mix and you want the vocals in the middle, then I guess you're putting the singer in the middle of the sound stage too.
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, and
I was going to point out that you mentioned stereo miking the acoustic.
I did.
And I thought that was clever because then you've got vocal in the center, but instead of a mono acoustic that's now competing for the vocal, it's also like a little bit wider than the vocal and opening up space.
Yeah, it's an Audio-Technica mic that I still have. It's my go-to drum room mic. It's a AT4050 ST. And so it's 2 diaphragms already set up perfectly. You don't have to worry about setting up 2 mics and getting it in phase. And that was the mic I used on his acoustic. And you have to be careful with the placement.
So it's kind of an XY.
Yeah. And it's got a little switch on it where you can do 90 degrees or 120 or whatever the next.
Cool.
Yeah, so you can make it even wider. I don't remember which one I did, but it seemed to work for that record. These days when I'm in that situation where I've got someone playing and singing at the same time, I'll start out with ribbons, because you can really place the ribbons in a way to cancel out. You can use the figure 8 to your advantage.
Yeah, and the side rejection is so good on a figure 8 ribbon.
Yeah, and so I'll try that and see if I can make that work, if that sound works.
Yeah, because that's also particularly, it can be a particularly warm, smooth tone.
Sure, it can be.
And you might want that or you might not.
Exactly. So, but in this scenario, the Audio-Technica stereo mic worked great, and I think he was singing through an AT4060, and I just set him up kind of in a line, as good as I got it all in phase, as good as I could. And
right, so you don't necessarily want the vocal mic placed out a little bit and then the acoustic mic in closer, because then you got a phase thing going on.
Yeah, you want to kind of try to line them up as good as you can, but you'll never get it perfectly in phase in that situation. You just kind of hope for get as close as you can,
Yeah, I guess a way to think about it is, with 2 mics out there, your voice is going into one mic, but it's also going into the other.
That's the problem. Usually the problem is that the vocal is too much in the acoustic mic, not the other way around. Usually there's the acoustic bleeding into the vocal mic is not the problem. It's the other way around.
Yeah, I find when I do the double miking thing, the acoustic bleeding into the vocal mic can give you the sort of in-your-face mid-range upper mid of the acoustic guitar.
Sure.
Yeah. And then the close mic sort of fills in the body of the acoustic.
Yeah.
You want it. And you always got to check that phase polarity.
The phase is
which one's better.
Super important in that situation.
You kind of start with the vocal striking you as in phase, and then you just flip the acoustic to match.
Sure. Yep. And then you just got to move them. Move them back and forth because. Inevitably you'll set the mics and you'll go back out and the guy's leaning back in the chair or he's leaning forward and then everything's changed, so you kind of have to readjust.
And, if there wasn't a bunch of other musicians, or maybe there is, but he still needs to fix the lyric in the second verse.
Yeah.
Now you always have to remember to punch the vocal, but also the acoustic, and he has to play along. You kind of like slip it in.
And we definitely did some of that because that was the only way to fix things. And like I say, he's such a great singer that there wasn't a whole lot to fix, but there were some things for sure.
Another artist, Grace and Tony. Invitation to an Autopsy.
Yes.
That one struck me as maybe an approach of vocals with a room mic in there too. Just sort of like you could hear the room around the voice. Is that something you sometimes do? Will you record a vocalist and then also have room mics going?
Not frequently, although, I will occasionally cut vocals out in the big room, which definitely sounds different than vocals in an ISO booth.
Right, you just hear it
You
on
hear
the mic.
you hear the room. And I don't remember particularly on that record. I may have had one of them in the booth and the other out in the room, but I'm glad you mentioned that record. I absolutely love that record, and it's I don't know if you've had this happen to you, but it's one of the many times in my life where I've done a record with a band and just poured my heart and soul into it. Everybody worked really hard. It's great, it's great, it's great. And the band breaks up.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, wah, wah, you know.
Or I've had it where the band didn't break up the record label. Just they were at artwork.
Yeah.
It was our big, after a year or two of getting ready for this thing. And then the label's like, yeah, we're dropping you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kudos to them. They had been out touring. I mean, they were a married couple. They had kids, and they were out touring and trying to make it work. And
You're too understanding.
Yeah. Well, but anyway, they wrote all these great songs. I mean, the record is just really very cool. It's like, they've got songs about Frankenstein and I'm drawing a blank on some of the other song titles right now. But anyway, it's a really cool record. So, but yeah, awesome. I don't remember particularly room mics on the vocals. So.
Okay, but that's not. I think if it was something you did regularly, that would have been this. But commenting on how the different spaces have different qualities like that. I think that's a good reminder to us, especially a lot of people with home studios where, you might be fighting that or just trying to decide if you should fight it.
Sure. Sometimes
that's the sound. I mean, we would do sessions sometimes, a lot of demo sessions with an artist I worked with before we went into the pro studio to record. And discover the vocal just on that day, because we used to record in the hallway, it just had this sound, and we're never going to get that sound again, So embrace those unique sounds and all these home studio environments too.
Absolutely.
It's one of the things that I think is really cool if you allow yourself to go do kind of mobile recordings and field recordings, and then bring it back to mix. You can capture all these unique spaces.
Oh man, man, I've done a few mobile recordings. Those are interesting. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a quick story about a Jason Isbell live from Alabama. They hired me to help record. He did 2 shows, and I had a Pro Tools rig. And on the second night, we were in Birmingham at Workplay. And so my whole job is to just monitor the Pro Tools rig, monitor the levels, make sure everything's good. And the end of the show, I hit the space bar and the computer crashes.
You were using Pro Tools?
Yes. And I was like...
You didn't know about Reaper yet?
Panic. No, I did not. This was many years ago.
Yeah.
But I did learn a lesson that night. And since then, I will, if someone wants me to do a live recording, you have to have redundancy, or I won't do it.
Yeah.
Luckily, we didn't lose anything. I had to rebuild the session, but all the files were there. But actually, a couple years ago, I got hired to go do a AJ Croce live show. I was like, I'll do it, but the front of house guy. I mean, now the digital boards, you can just stick a SD card in or whatever, and so we had multiple recordings going, and everything was fine. But man, you're talking about panic. Hey, Jason, can we do that one again? It's like...
Well, you think it's easy to take things for granted.
Yeah.
It's easy to get, you just forget that this thing might not work tomorrow.
Yeah.
With the computer, with the tape machine, I got used to it. With the MCI, I would just align it. I go in and I might hit the play button and it just won't go today, and it wasn't much fun. Computer, same thing. You walk into the studio and you're like, Pro Tools opened yesterday. This session worked yesterday. Man. For some reason, it doesn't work today. You know, and again, as I get used to it, you get less stressed out, and I'm not even as stressed about telling the artist hang tight. Sort it out.
I've got the spinning ball of death on my screen right now. Just take a break.
A recent discovery for me too was I had some weird stuff going on. And it might have just been because I opened a different session. Sometimes a corrupt thing appears and messes everything else up.
Mm-hmm.
But all my channels, my inputs are 1 through 16 and then 17 through 32. All the 17 through 32 ones would just freak out. And like you patch into 17 and now it's like inputting every third on repeat or something. So none of the numbers line up anymore, even though it says it's working in your Pro Tools session. And the solution, which was advice from Glenn Rosenstein, a reminder actually, is trash the prefs.
Sure.
Which is a not fun thing for somebody to tell you on a session where you're like, oh, I don't want to dig in and mess with all this. And but I learned, I forget what the name of the designer is, but there's a Pro Tools trashing prefs.
It's called
app.
PT Prefs or something.
PT Prefs.
Yes, great.
So great. I use it now.
Gotta have that.
And so it's just this free app you can download, Rockstars. And when you're in a jam like that, when you're looking at it, you're like, I know I'm doing everything right, and it's just not acting right. You can try this, and you just hit the trash prefs thing. It actually backs up the prefs you had,
which is so cool that it does that.
Yeah, and I think you can, and then you restart Pro Tools, it rebuilds it, and then you can import those prefs back in, and potentially it'll put everything back the way you liked it, but working again.
The thing that I hate the most about that whole process is because you know how you can put your favorite plugins kind of at the top of the plugin list. Like if you hold down the command key and select it, then it'll put it like at the top.
Yeah, but you can only do like a couple or something.
No, you can do tons.
Really?
Absolutely.
Give me that tip because I need that one. So you just it puts it above the search window.
Yes, like you go like you're like before you even hit the search window for plugins, just hold down command key and go and click on whatever plugin you want to have on your favorites list. Then the next time you go back to the list, it'll just be at the top.
So if you've really got like 5 to 10 that are your total favorites,
you just put them right there. They'll always be there until you have to trash your preferences.
Right.
And then they go away and you have to do it again and again and again.
It's all right. It's time for new favorites.
Yeah. So, but I'm kind of digging the new, the search where you can just search for a plugin. I like that. And what's the new? Gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the software that's integrating with Pro Tools now, where you can have all the quick keys. And Andrew Sheps has been promoting.
Oh yeah, Soundflow.
Soundflow, where you can actually.
I just coded in a whole new macro. I was like, all right, let's just figure it out. And do it. It's a little bit of a brain twister, but I was like, you can figure this out. I paused. It wasn't that hard. I mean, it took me a minute, but like I have a whole routine of button clicks that I do when I'm comping vocals.
Sure.
And I was like, this is stupid. I'm just trying to be really good at doing 10 button clicks real fast. I'm like, why don't I just make it one button click?
Yeah. Those things are great. And I'm really trying to get into those kind of time-saving, features because, I mean, when you do what I do for a living and you're on a computer all the time, the fewer clicks you can do makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
In the way I feel at the end of the day. I mean, it does. And like with the Soundflow, there's a shortcut. I think it's like Control Shift and the F1 through whatever keys. Like if you want to put a plugin on slot 1, you can do like Control Shift F1, and all of a sudden Soundflow brings up a window and you can search. Massenburg EQ or whatever you're looking for, and it'll find the plugin and load it.
Oh, that's great.
Without clicking anything.
Yeah.
So, and if you want to put it in slot 2, you use F2 and Control Shift F2, I think. So, I mean, those are huge things. I mean, that's several clicks that I didn't have to do with a mouse, and I love it.
Yeah, and in my experience, I always like writing my own too, because inevitably there's something that I do that's my little trick or something. And then and the way that I find it's helpful is study what your hands are doing. Think about it for a second. And I realized I was like, my right hand would be on the trackball. And every time I did it, I'd have to do a click where I take my hand off the trackball and move to another key. And then I'd have to look down. Yeah. And that's a big one. Looking up and down really slows me down.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate, Rockstars, in case you weren't following this, Soundflow is a macro app that you can install, and you can integrate it with your Stream Deck, and which gives you little colorful buttons with graphics on it.
Yeah.
And you can tell it to do a whole sequence of movements. And they've got ones that they've already written, like what you just said with the Shift F key. And so you can really speed up your workflow. At first, it's a little overwhelming because they try to simplify it, but there's so many options. It's like, it's overwhelmed by too much possibility. So I find it's helpful to like really think about like, what do I actually need right now in this moment, and then go see if you can find it.
Sure. Yeah. It's my understanding is that it comes with your Pro Tools subscription now, but it's kind of a light version. Like that version, you can't like write your own macros, so you can use kind of what they already have pre-programmed.
Oh, okay.
But then you can pay a subscription, and then you get the full thing where you can write macros. I think like Andrew Sheps has written a macro that will like print stems for you, just stuff like that.
That one's great. Yeah, that's one called Bounce Factory.
Bounce Factory, yeah.
That one I think maybe is a subscription, but it's very powerful.
Yeah, and I'm trying to, I've got so many subscriptions in my life, I don't want another one, so I'm just trying to use the ones that come with it.
Subscriptions.
Oh, man, geez. We actually just recently figured out that we've been paying $7.99 for a protection plan on an iPhone 5 for all these years. It's like, you got to be kidding me, man. It totaled like $700. I'm like, we've been paying for something that we got rid of however many years ago.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Do you feel like all the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mixing process I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick, and I'll save a seat for you at the front row table at the Grammys. All right, so you got time for a few more questions?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. So the Dead South Fat Little Killer Boy,
yeah.
What a name, starts with a slightly echoey banjo. I think a echo vocal then comes in too.
Okay.
But it made me think about, banjo treatments. Actually, I kind of skipped over a question I want to ask around that too, so I'll come back to it.
Sure.
But talk about banjo, talk about, do you sometimes do a banjo and then you put a certain kind of space around it for a different kind of sound?
Yeah, that particular song, I think we were kind of going for like a lo-fi intro, that kind of lo-fi intro that then kind of breaks into, hi-fi or full fidelity or whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, I don't remember what I did it particularly, but I'm sure
Let's
I just
kind of nut-fi.
Mixed nuts. But I think I just probably limited the bandwidth and maybe put some saturation on it or something like that. But I love that track. The Dead South are a great band. They are out there absolutely killing it, just selling out everywhere they go. They played the Ryman last year for the first time and sold it out.
Wow.
First time ever.
Amazing.
I'm actually coming back up here on Saturday to go to the Grand Ole Opry. They're playing the Grand Ole Opry.
Oh, that's great.
And so they're artists. I've done 2 records with them now and just love them. They're fantastic guys. But
I haven't done the Grand Ole Opry yet. I got a buddy who
you got to
plays
do
Phil
that
there regularly. He's like, come on out.
Yeah, it's cool. But anyway, your question was banjo. So yeah, banjo is a little bit like mandolin in a sense that most of the time you're kind of miking it down below the instrument. I guess the sound kind of the sound kind of comes out of the holes around the drum head. I mean, you don't have to do it. I've put it up kind of more like I would mic an acoustic guitar sometimes, but generally you kind of start in that area. And, you're just looking for some, I mean, banjos are, obviously they're bright,
Yeah.
and so you're looking for something that doesn't necessarily accentuate that,
Have you heard a real variety of banjos and realized that all the banjos just start out sounding very different from each
Yeah,
other?
and how they play it, there's different techniques. I mean, if you're playing like traditional banjo with the steel picks, I mean, it's going to be very bright.
Yeah.
But if you're doing like a claw hammer thing, it's completely different,
Right.
and it's not near as bright. And so sometimes you actually have to brighten those up, to have them cut through the track.
All right. Small diaphragm versus large diaphragm microphones.
In general?
Well, specifically, like the question I was asking around the Dead South, recording an acoustic ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
And steel drivers actually.
Yeah.
Is just that question of like which mics are we bringing out for these different instruments?
Yeah.
Is it always back and forth for every instrument, or are there some where you're more likely to be doing a small or a large?
Pretty much always used small diaphragms on mandolins. Actually, I have used I've got a ribbon mic that I like on mandolins sometimes, which is the Masanovic. I can't remember the model number, but they work well on banjos. Mandolins. But typically, it's small diaphragm on mandolins. On acoustic guitar, generally, I use small diaphragms. I recently got some Neumann Gefell M582s
Mm-hmm.
that I love on acoustic guitar. Actually, Craig Alvin turned me on to those, and they're incredible on acoustic guitar.
Are they older mic or a newer one?
They're old, like 60s, and they're small diaphragm tube mics.
Right on.
And they sound great on acoustic guitar. And so I'll use those on acoustic a lot. Like we were talking about earlier, the steel drivers, I used a large diaphragm on Gary because that was the only stereo mic I had that was,
right.
And so I wanted, and it worked fine.
So like how would you describe the sonic quality difference between large diaphragm and small diaphragm on these acoustic instruments? What do you hear typically?
Gosh, that's a tough question. I'm not really sure. I mean, since I got the Neumann, the Gefell, the M582s, I've actually used them on vocals several times recently, and it sounded fantastic.
And that's the small diaphragm.
That's the small diaphragm. I'd never really done that much. I'd heard of people using small diaphragms on vocals, and I tried it and really loved it. You do have to be careful because you can get more kind of plosives, I guess.
Right.
And so I would kind of angle the mic down at their mic a little bit. I mean, at their mouth a little bit. And to try to prevent that, but I mean, I guess they say that the small diaphragms in general kind of pick up the transients better than large diaphragms. So if you're looking for that, you could pick it. But
I found I've enjoyed switching back to small diaphragms for my overheads on drums for a while, because what I realized that I liked about it was it made the cymbals sound a little thinner and sizzlier.
Sure.
Where I could like tuck them back in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Large diaphragms in those situations are great if I want that to be the whole drum sound.
Exactly.
But when I wanted to have some, cymbal mics just sort of kind of just be cymbals and I could tuck them in against the rest of it.
Totally.
That seemed like a cool way to do it.
Yeah.
And then like large diaphragms on acoustics sound very full. And would you say that they're really useful if it's the only instrument going, or if you want a finger pick part that sounds like sort of big and rich and dark?
Yeah, that's the main thing. Yeah, if you want something just strumming in the background of a heavy track with drums and bass and electric guitars, small diaphragms totally the way to go,
because then you hear that high without then wanting to go in and have to EQ it to pull it out of the other mic.
100%. Yeah. But I mean, if it's the feature and it's you want it to be big, then maybe you do pick a large diaphragm, and let it be more.
And then
full.
Do you ever do the double mic trick where you do a small and a large right next to each other, and then you can blend them almost like it's your EQ?
I don't do with a small and large diaphragm necessarily. Most of the time,
well, you should, Jimmy.
Okay, well, I will actually. I mean, most of the time, if I use two mics on an acoustic, it would be actually recently I rediscovered a technique I did years ago, which is, you put one like 12th fret or whatever where the neck meets the body, kind of where you normally would, and you put another small diaphragm up over their right shoulder pointing down.
Yeah.
And that can be pretty cool, actually.
That's a cool one. I learned that pointing down one. I remember doing a session with Will Kimbrough where we were just struggling to get the right sound. And it was like, I was like, let's try that. And it makes sense because it's like, well, it's like the guitar player. It's like, where's my ear?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like now the mic is up at ear level, looking down, but it kind of has to be in front of the guitar player's head a little bit because you want it to be looking down and also still seeing the fingers on the strings a little.
Yeah, yeah. So if I'm going to stereo mic and acoustic, I'll do that, or I'll just do an XY. Just, I don't really like the space pair in front of an acoustic that much. I don't feel like I can get either mic in the right spot. I mean, I've done it, but it just, and honestly, 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to put one mic on an acoustic. It just, there's no phase issues, and just find the sweet spot. And I've recorded an acoustic guitar probably more than any other instrument because I started out as, I was the staff engineer at Fame for their publishing company. So my days were spent doing songwriter demos, I mean, Jason Isbell would walk in with his acoustic guitar and I would mic him up and he'd play all the songs he had written the last month. And,
Would you agree that that good reason to do the stereo is to move the guitar out of the center so that if it's just guitar and voice?
Sure.
So that you've got a little bit of space for the voice and a little bit of width on the
sound. And
I mean, it's mono, single mic, great if you're doubling the guitars and panning it.
If you're doubling them and panning them, or if you just, again, if it's a thick track that's got multiple electrics and bass guitar and an acoustic, sometimes a single mono acoustic just panned off to one side can be fine, maybe totally. Halfway or something. But yeah, I mean, if it's going to be a feature, I'm working on a band from Huntsville, Alabama right now called Luna Coy. And we started out kind of with acoustic guitar and vocals. And I kind of thought that was going to be the main thing. We've actually since gone to a bigger production and added other things. But I started out with a stereo mic'd acoustic and vocals because I wanted it to take up more space.
Right. Isn't that one of the challenges? Sometimes we're starting a song, but we don't really know where it's going.
Oh, no, this one, I did not know we were going to go this far down the road, but it's cool. It's been fun, but I would have done things a little differently.
Yeah, right.
But it's okay. It happens how it happens. You know?
And it's not like, it's kind of like that lesson you learn when you try and record every mic you can think of on the drums, thinking you'll just use the one you like later. And then you're like, that didn't really work. They just all sounded like shit together. It's the same thing. It's like you kind of can't really, I mean, I suppose you could try, but I doubt it would work as well as hoped for. But like recording a stereo version of the acoustic plus the mono version of the acoustic at the same time, because you'd be like, which one am I listening to while we're working anyway? You know?
I mean, I come from the school of thought of like, I'm trying to make it sound like a mix from like the beginning.
Right.
I had an intern recently, he recorded me doing an overdub out in the studio, and I came back into the control room and listened to his mix, and he had turned the track like way down, and the acoustic guitar that I was recording was like way up.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm just curious, like, why did you do that? What was your thought process? Well, he was like, well, if you needed me or, had made a mistake or needed to get my attention, I wanted to make sure I could hear you.
Right.
And I was like, man, you'll hear me. I'll let you know, like, make it sound like a record. Always be listening in perspective,
Now, so to continue that dialogue, in your studio, is the mix for you playing the acoustic a different mix from what's coming out of the speakers?
So right now I've got, I've been working with Here Technologies. They're actually based in Huntsville, Alabama.
They're great. Yeah.
We were the beta test site for them when I worked at Fame. And so I've been with those guys. They're fantastic. And so I've got their Hearback Pro system, which is a 16-channel mixer. It sounds great. You can pan everything how you want it. So
drummers don't complain?
No. I actually have a stereo drum, two channels that are stereo drums, and then a kick and a snare on individual channels.
Right, so because sometimes that's what they want.
Yeah.
They just want more of that.
But I don't currently have a mix going to the headphones, the same thing that I'm hearing. Most of the people I work with are used to kind of making their own mix. However, I'm about to change that. I see the logic and the reasoning behind having, just a knob you can turn up, like this is everything. This is the mix. And then if you want more me, and and actually most Nashville musicians prefer it that way. And I've done a couple sessions recently, and I've got one coming up. We're actually going to do a day on Shenandoah. They're Shenandoah's cutting a new record, and so I want to have that option, And so I'm just trying to decide how to implement it, honestly, because I'm monitored through the console. The ADB is a split console, so that means the left side is all input and the right side is the monitoring section. So the mix that I'm hearing is on the monitoring section of the ADB. So I'm trying to think of the best way to just kind of give that.
When you say that I'm hearing, you mean the musician or the engineer?
Me, the enginener in the control room. Yeah. The musicians are hearing just
sends.
Yeah, the sends.
The board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think I know. So mine is often whatever's coming out of the speakers is what's going out to the other room.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those situations, which are common, I think, for a lot of home studios too,
mm-hmm.
it's true that a musician might need to hear it louder in the headphones.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it can be common that people are instinctively cranking up the overdub. I mean, like so many vocalists I work with, I'm just like, sure, you can have it as loud as you want.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like a mix to me in here yet. But I agree with you. I prefer to hear it like a mix in the control room because you're trying to get it to the finished thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many decisions you would make differently if the thing's turned down and it's more like a mix, you might be more inclined to go, that sounds great.
Sure.
But when it's cranked up and it's under a microscope, you might be inclined to go, oh, I heard that's weird. That doesn't sound right. Do it again,
mm-hmm.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I know, like for me, as a musician out there, like on an acoustic particularly,
mm-hmm.
there's times where I'm like, oh, I really need to hear a lot of this in the headphones for it to make sense to me.
Yeah, I think the best scenario is to have, if you have the abilities to send a mix of everything and then have more me's where people can turn themselves up as they need, that's really the best scenario. I just haven't implemented that yet, but I'm going to.
Oh, well, so I'll continue on that some more because I think it's so important too. Because
super important.
It took me a long, I don't know how long it took, but it felt like it took me a while to learn this. Like, and my first mentor, Brad Jones, was trying to teach it to me right away at the beginning. Is like, the very first move, it's like, sure, you can work on the sounds, but the very first move is get all the musicians comfy in their headphones.
Totally.
They need to start playing.
Totally.
Took me a while to learn that lesson.
I have got so much work over the years from musicians that had a great experience in my studio. You mentioned Will McFarlane earlier. Will's a great guitar player that I work with a lot. And he's recommended my studio and brought a lot of people to my studio over the years because we take care of the musicians. We want to make sure they've got what they need and they're hearing well. And, you give a musician a great headphone mix, they're going to have a positive experience.
Yeah, and when you put yourself out there as a musician, it's like, duh.
Yep.
You're like, of course, I'm trying to play a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't feel it and hear it, you can't play it.
No.
But what was I going to say about that? What I was going to continue was just the other discovery for me was, you've got the more me thing against the stereo mix that's coming from the control room.
Right.
But then you also have the scenario where you're playing the electric guitar and you're standing next to the drummer,
mm-hmm.
which is a great way to play and record as a band because everybody, you're feeling it in the chest and you
mm-hmm.
can see each other.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're out there, you realize, wow, we really don't need a lot of drums in the headphones because it's too much. And vocals.
Vocals.
Nobody else wants to hear the vocalist as loud as the vocalist wants to hear themselves.
Right.
So there really are instances where especially in these like big electrified kind of sounds where what the musicians need to hear is quite different from what you want to do in the control room.
Absolutely. And And I don't know that the mix that I would send, the mix that I'm hearing that I would send to the headphones, that would probably be minus the vocals. I don't really think, to your point, I think that, everyone wants to kind of control how loud they're hearing the vocals. The bass player might want it different than the guitar player, whatever, so.
Yeah. And it depends on the session too. So on the sessions where the vocal is a guide track,
right,
and it's going to get redone,
right,
then you're not going to want to hear so much of it necessarily, potentially.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got a vocalist whose timing is just off too.
Sure. It can throw everybody
does that
off.
Throw you off. Wow,
Yeah.
But then there are also the sessions where, like, especially if it's a no-click session, you got to have the vocals in the headphones because the vocals are everything. They tell you everything about the song and what it's trying to do,
There's so many funny stories. I don't remember all the details, but there was some story of session players, had a guy in the studio who was singing who wasn't very good, and they all had him turned down in their mix.
Yeah.
And he was getting so mad because he was trying to talk and no one was paying any attention to him. It's just like, it just really went downhill because no one was communicating with.
He needed a secondary talkback button.
Yeah.
Like a button, he hits it, and then all of a sudden his mic goes loud in the headphones.
Yeah.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins and Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. Groovy. Well, we are hitting the end of our stretch. I get more questions, but we'll save them for our next session.
Sounds great.
Let me just jump to a couple of our closing out questions because you're a studio guy. You've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
So, what do you want to say about either a resource or maybe it's something online, maybe it's something physical, or it's just a tip for the business side of doing this? So, if you want to do this music thing, do the studio thing, and you want it to be more than just a lifelong hobby, what do you want to say to the rock stars?
Man, one of the things that a guy named Walt Aldridge told me in the beginning of my journey, and Walt is a very successful songwriter, great session player. He was a studio manager at Fame for many years, great guy. He said, if you just get up early in the morning, you'll beat half the people in the music business.
Right.
And I mean, his point was, treat it like a job, I mean, and so, my advice is you have to work hard. I mean, I've worked really hard to get where I am. And I think, like for instance, this happens all the time. I'll start mixing a record for an artist and I'll send them mixes and great, that's perfect, we're done. I'll be the one saying, but wait, I want to try, I want to try one more, or two more, so I'm constantly trying to better myself and get better. And, I mean, I'll watch YouTube videos and try to pick up.
Addicted to YouTube.
Try to pick up tips from mix tips from all kinds of people, and so I'm constantly trying to learn. And so you just have to, you have to treat it like a business. You have to handle your business. I mean, I do, part of my job is I do all my own bookwork. I have QuickBooks, and I have to sit down and balance everything out and I have a CPA that helps me with taxes and payroll taxes and all that stuff. But for the most part, I do it all,
Yeah.
So,
Well, you can't get in trouble for messing up your own organization, but you can get in trouble for not doing your taxes right.
yeah,
So start with the CPA, rock stars.
yeah,
Make sure you get that part right.
absolutely.
Okay, cool. How about a tip or a resource for the organizational side of things? So, like, one of the hard things about doing a studio is, how do you keep your shit together?
Organizational, like you mean in terms of
whatever comes to mind for you.
Okay.
Whatever you feel like.
Well, I mean, actually, you and I had a conversation when I first got here. You were showing me your studio. We're talking about leaving things set up. So my studio, 95% of the time is people coming to my studio to work with me. There are usually 3, 4, 5 times a year that I'll rent the studio out to other producers and engineers. And at that point, we'll kind of reset things and take mics down and start from scratch. But I pretty much keep everything mic'd up. My piano's mic'd up. The Hammond organ's mic'd up. The drums, everything's pretty ready to go. So I don't have to spend a lot of time reinventing the wheel every time I work.
Yeah.
So that works for me. That's not going to work at Blackbird. I mean, they're going to have a whole different set of people in there every week or whatever their turnover is. So, but that works for me, and it helps me, maximize my time. I don't want to have to start from scratch every time.
Yeah.
So that's what comes to mind when you say organization in the studio. Just having things ready to go.
I agree. I'm doing more of that now, and one of the things that helps me do that is by having enough mic preamps, enough mics and enough mic preamps. It's actually to me, it's the most compelling reason to have, 32 inputs into my Pro Tools. It's not because I need to record 32 instruments, or it's not because I need 32 mics on a drum set or anything.
Right.
It's just that I can leave the drums set up, leave the bass, leave the guitars, have the organ going, have the piano going.
Absolutely.
And then because it gives you that ability to just say, like, oh, I've got an idea for a piano part, and go do it.
Done.
Instead of going in there and spending, you run out of juice just setting up the mics, and then by the time you get ready to do the piano, you're like, I don't know what I was thinking.
Absolutely.
Or you just go, it's not set up.
Yeah. No, it works. I enjoy that. I wouldn't want to have to go grab mics, grab stands, grab chords, and every time I want to do a piano overdub, I know what I like on the piano. It stays set up and it's ready to go.
Yeah. All right. Then now this last question is our hypothetical one. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You get to go back in time and find young Jimmy with this 4-track. And you say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice do you want to go back and give yourself if you could?
Oh, man. Stop, or not stop, but don't worry so much about what other people think.
Yeah.
Relax.
What about me? Do you worry about what I think?
Yes. That's my problem.
I worry about what you think, man.
Well, it's like, our job is based around wanting people to like what we do.
Yeah.
I want you to like my mixes. I want you to like my studio, all that stuff.
Do we ever like what we do?
Yes. There are things, there are things that I've done over the years that I love. I mean, some of the stuff that I sent you on the Spotify playlist are things that I go, hey, that's a good record. I did a good job. It all came together, whatever. But
wait, was I supposed to listen to that song?
No, you weren't. Yeah.
What about when you like it? Do you like it right away after you do it, or do you notice that thing where 6 months later you listen to it and you're like, oh, that's right,
Yeah, it happens different ways. I mean, sometimes, by the time you get to the end of a record, for instance, you're kind of sick of hearing it. And a lot of times I lose perspective, I don't know if it's good anymore, But then sometimes you can have an experience where you hear it, 6 months later and go, wow, that's pretty cool, it's a good record,
Yeah. So, I find it helps to have that window of time where you forget what you did.
Sure.
And also I think it's inherent that we don't like stuff because it's the very nature of doing a thing and then trying to improve on that thing means you automatically are like, how can I make that thing better?
Sure.
So when we're working on it, we're just like always like looking for where's the next fix.
Mm-hmm.
We're just fixated on like making a change.
Yeah, and it's, it all comes down to emotion, and I'm trying to just hammer this into my own head, but I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do is play somebody a song and have them feel happy or sad or want to dance or whatever, I mean, that's everything we should do should be in service of that. And it's easy to go down these rabbit holes of chasing snare sounds and things like that just don't matter at the end of the day, know? And so I try to keep that as my focus, but it's hard because, I think as engineers, we're kind of part scientists and we like the tweaky stuff and the technical side, and you can go down that road, and sometimes that's the road you need to go down. But at the end, you got to be able to, play that mix for somebody and watch their body language and, kind of read between the lines of their comments and see really what they think,
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to go down the mad scientist thing on our own time too. So that it's like when it's time to just capture emotion.
Sure.
We already know that if we, change the snare mic from blue to orange, it's going to solve it real quick.
Yeah.
We just do it.
Absolutely.
Well, Jimmy, it's great to have you on the podcast, man. Thanks so much for coming up and hanging. Rockstars, he drove all the way up from Muscle Shoals to Pod Damn It Studio here just so that he could be here in person and listen to the Toy Box speakers.
I wanted to come see your place, man.
Well, so let the Rockstars know, where should they go to connect with you, learn more about you and your work, and what if they're ready to come down to the Shoals and make their next record? Yeah,
I've got a fairly new website it's just thenuthouse.com. Nut is with 2 T's, so TheNuttHouse.com. You can contact me there. There's actually a great form that you can fill out that gives me information about, what you're wanting to do, what kind of session you're wanting to book, and also have links on my website for the music makers where you can get rebates. If you're from out of town, you come into the Shoals to make your record, you can get rebates. So
that sounds great.
Yeah, you can find me there. Of course, you can find me on, Facebook or Instagram. Those are pretty much my two things. I'm not a
Can we get a little punch card where like after you make 5 records or 10 records, you just get a free record? Is that the way it works?
I don't think
like
so.
Like the old coffee shop days.
I don't think so.
Well, dude, thanks for hanging with us, Rockstars. Thank you for listening. And Jimmy, I look forward to coming down and seeing your studio.
Come on down anytime.
All right, man. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.